guys want to come up and do the introduction? I will introduce James, but I'm sure he will do a much better job of introducing himself after I'm done. James Allen creates book excavations by transforming books into relief sculptures. He has been featured on Oregon Art Week on Oregon Public Broadcasting, and his work can be found in the collections of UCLA, Johns Hopkins University, the Ringling School of Design, and the University of Puget Sound. James's excavations have been shown at many museums and galleries, including the Bellevue Arts Museum, Brooklyn Public Library, the Morris Museum, and the Portland Airport, if you happen to be flying with UX. His work is currently on display in Concourse A, which you'll need to be taking a trip in order to access. And it will be up through September.
Yeah.
And he lives and works here in Portland, where he is represented by Russo Lee Gallery and 23 Sandy Gallery. Please help me welcome James Allen.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy and John and the crew at the museum and the whole museum. Yeah, so I was invited to do this artist talk and pick a piece from the museum collection to relate to, you know, through my work. And I picked this Joseph Cornell piece. I've always loved Joseph Cornell's Shadowbox work. I was born in Illinois and grew up in Wisconsin, and we would take the train to Chicago on the weekends. You could just take the commuter rail, and it was like, I don't know, $10 or something, and you could just ride it all weekend, you know, because on the weekend it wasn't very busy, so we'd go to all the museums, all the art museums. The Art Institute in Chicago has a number of Joseph Cornell pieces and a great surrealist collection. He gets kind of placed in context with the surrealists, even though maybe technically he's not necessarily a surrealist artist, but I just like that he uses, you know, found material, ephemera. This piece here, he takes, you know, just little bits from magazines and newspapers and little trinkets that he finds, and they all symbolize different things to him. He kind of had he's maybe more of a symbolist than a surrealist. But I'll read this excerpt out of this book that kind of more concisely describes Cornell's work. Cornell's art gives full expression to the many aspects of his personality. His principal contribution and the central focus of this study lies in the development of his shadow boxes, small-scale box constructions with pasted papers, reproductions, sandpipes, and other found objects assembled in a kind of collage with depth, framed in wood and usually sealed with glass. Cornell produced a great number of these boxes, many of them undated, as well as numerous variations on individual boxes and repetitions of a single theme in more than one work. Cornell worked in an elliptical rather than linear fashion, except for the earlier boxes, which tended to be singular. He worked in series that often played out over a decade or more. He did not discard much, but he was selective. And then it goes on to say that the distillations of all these interests into a spare but poetic fantasy of his boxes transformed the box construction into a realm of both precise and enigmatic existence. So, and I can relate to a lot of those things in my work. I find these books, some of them are newer, like this is a newer publication, and then this is an old engineering book, and so it has a bunch of like just technical drawings from engineering from this page is April 23rd, let's see, what was the date? 1897. So this is over 100 years old. And it was just kind of like the journal of the whole year of what was happening in engineering at the time. So you have machinery from the Chicago Drainage Canal when they were trying to change the flow of Lake Michigan in Chicago, and just all kinds of different machines. But I've always been fascinated with taking just kind of refuse, scraps of things, and then just putting them together and creating something kind of mysterious and magical out of it. And I think, Joseph Cornell was trying to do that with his work to reach, he would bring together larger contexts. And so in my books, the context is already kind of given to me, where the book has a limited scope. So the book kind of chooses its theme, but I, like Cornell, like to come back to certain themes. Like I've been doing a series of these golden nature guides, and they did a bunch of these beautiful pocket books. This one is trees. But they have ones on birds and mammals and all kinds of stuff. And as I find them, then I'll do another one in the series. So, unlike a lot of artists who would, maybe do all of them at once and have them in a show, they kind of tend to pop up here and there as they become available to me. And, before I was doing the books, I would just collect things off the street and try to make art out of them. I got into the book art by just taking magazines that I, found in recycle bins or whatever, and then carving into those, or taking old photographs and altering old photographs, and basically using free materials was always sort of, partly out of necessity of limiting, what I would spend on art materials, and partly out of wanting to be sort of more environmentally conscious about, wanting to just make something without consuming more things. And just out of fascination with the history of the object itself, and that somebody else has put all of this work into this book, and then I can put a new way into enjoying that, and then there's still other copies of that book out there, so it's, especially if a particular book, if you already like a particular book, then you can see it in a new light. And so I always enjoyed that. So that's why I chose this piece. Joseph Cornell, this one references it says the Hotel de la Clef D'Or, and he'll often have these French hotel references in his work, though technically I don't think that he ever went to Europe. He was actually kind of reclusive and a shy person. He lived in New York with his mother, and I think that he was more fascinated with maybe the world in his imagination, and then when that became reality, it sometimes was almost less interesting to him. He made a bunch of pieces he was fascinated by certain ballerinas or opera singers, and so one time when one of his favorite opera singers was in New York from Europe, and he convinced his gallerist to have an opening in honor of her and invited her to the opening. And he did this whole installation where this one room was just completely dedicated to her. But then when she came, then he was too shy to speak to her and didn't even talk to her, which is very strange if you were to be invited to somewhere in honor by a specific person. But he was actually really involved in the art community, and not just in the visual arts. He did a lot of writing and publication. He made movies he would direct and script the movies and set up photographs, of portraits of him with his photographer friends. And so just a really mysterious person, really interesting to read about. But some of the other artists that influenced me, I could have picked a lot of different artists in the museum, but I've always liked Dada and Surrealism, especially like Max Ernst. And I got to see a show of his in Paris where he would take all of these type of line drawings that were, kind of turn of the century, or he would take the engravings and just make these really interesting collages with them. And so for a while I always had a bunch of books with really cool images, and I was like cutting out of them and making collages until I started doing this. But I still take the scraps of these sometimes and mess around with the collages. They're just not as popular, I guess, as the books have kind of taken off for me. I also build the frames myself. They're a little more formal than Cornell's. I worked in a frame shop, or I've worked in several frame shops, so I learned to build wood from scratch, and I really like working in the wood shop. And so I also try to find all the wood. Some of this frame isn't, but I recently built a bunch of frames. I found a pallet that actually, the support wood was a bunch of really nice maple, because it was a really long pallet. So the big pieces of wood were actually all hardwood. So I milled it up, and they turned into really nice frames. But I also enjoy sort of the sense of nostalgia, I think, that Joseph Cornell, I'm kind of a romantic and like to think about how did people think about different subjects 100 years ago. And so I get to learn a little bit about it while I'm cutting through the book. And then the finished piece has stories about the different things and references, different time periods in the past and different subjects. And I guess that's maybe all I have to say about it. We can have more of a question and answer maybe if anyone has questions about my work or Cornell or whatever, I can answer.
So did you find that book and make it?
This book here?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I found this book at a yard sale, and the covers were, one of the covers was completely off, and then the back cover was falling off. So I just removed the covers and then have carved into it. This work is actually in progress, so it's not really finished yet. I just kind of wanted to bring it to kind of show some different, scale of my work.
So if you get a book and you open it up, and how do you know that you're not going to want what you just tore out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do actually cut away something because I think like, oh, there's something back here that will work better, and then it doesn't. But it's sort of too late usually if you decide to cut past something, multiple pages. If I accidentally cut part of something, I can like glue it back on or like adhere it, without it. There's some planning, but a lot of it is surprise, combinations of things,
How long have you been working on this?
How long have I been working on this particular piece? It kind of got put aside because I had some other deadlines that this wasn't a part of. So I've been working on it for like a year or so. But yeah.
Just curious, are you constantly looking for books? Do you stockpile books? Does a book instantly make a connection to you?
Yeah. Like one of the most important parts of making the book excavations is finding the right books. I love bookstores. I have lots of books. I'll never make it through all of the books that I'd like to work with, but I go to Powell's, of course. Let's see, Windows Booksellers in St. John's. There's the one that's kind of by Voodoo Donuts, and the Western Wear Store. And the name is, Cameron's Books. Thank you. Yeah, Cameron's Books. Cameron's Books is great because they have a lot of great material and it's not overpriced a lot, and it's just super fun searching through. Some of the stuff is just on boxes on the floor, and there's always, never takes too long to find something interesting in Cameron's. So yeah.
What is interesting about a book? How do you choose a book? What makes it interesting for you? Lots of pictures, lots of photos. What is it?
Yeah, I do like hand-done illustrations more than photos. I feel like they just end up being more cohesive and have a higher contrast. Because my work is really busy with photographs, it can be hard to combine them in more of a cohesive way. But sometimes I'm also looking for certain subject matters. I like to do a lot of nature books and the human body, but then, the engineering is fun, and architecture and design. I like to do like math and symmetry and esoteric kind of, diagrams about the universe and stuff. But it really depends if the illustrations have to have a certain type of contrast, I guess. It's just, it's sort of just like a personal, like, oh, I like these. It's mostly about liking the illustrations, and then, sometimes I'll play around with the words inside of it, kind of give it a little poetry within the piece. Go ahead.
Do you ever get to a point in a piece after some period of time where you realize this isn't going to work? And then what do you do if that happens? Then how do you either abandon it or change the whole, you have to change the whole thing or something like that?
Yeah, I do have some pieces in the studio that I'm just like, I don't know how to resolve this. Usually I'll be able to come back and figure out something to do with it. But, then there's other pieces that I'm like, this isn't going to work. And then I came back to it and finished it, and then it was a really good thing. I have like 3 or 4 pieces, but it's a lot of times it's when I'm trying to do something a little bit different with the works, trying to experiment with like a different direction, like I guess this is a little bit different, like opening it up and kind of like not cutting the cover off and just letting it kind of cascade down, whereas most of them are kind of just framed up like that and it's straightforward. But usually there's a way to resolve it without having to like completely abandon it. But sometimes they end up just like sitting in a drawer for a year or so. Yeah.
You mentioned architecture. Have you thought about doing an Escher book? One of his drawings?
It could be interesting. I haven't done a lot of like singular artist books, although, sometimes the illustrations in a book are often by one artist, but they're like more illustrations. But I haven't done a book that's just one particular artist. But it is a possibility. I just have tended to go more with subject matter, or like books where there's more of like groups of artists, just to kind of not, I don't know. And then I was thinking about doing an homage to Joseph Cornell with like maybe a bird book, just like cutting some circles in it, and sort of like has several pieces that have like birds in like holes where you're like looking through these holes. So I thought about that, but yeah, I do like Escher's work though. I like the play on the depth would add another layer too. But I did do a book that was like, what was it called? It was basically about those like kind of illusions that he would make, the like graphic illusions. What are they called? Anyway, they were sort of about optical illusions. Yeah, I have done a book that was kind of about optical illusions, and I think it had some of his within it. So.
Because Escher was trained as an architect originally, so that's why.
Someone recently was asking me if I could do a commission of their architectural manual from their like college years. And so it's like this thick book that has a bunch of little architectural illustrations. So I'll probably be working on that soon. Yeah.
That's one of my questions, if you do commissions, so you do.
Yeah, I do commissions, and it just depends on the book, and if there's a particular book, then I'll look at it, and if it's something that I think I can work with, then I'll do it, and if not, then sometimes it's just a matter of like searching for the right book and finding something else. Yeah. Yeah.
Another one on your,
No, go ahead.
on your smaller books, are they more fragile? Or can you just look at them and look at them again and again and again?
This book is painted shut, so it doesn't open anymore. And they're kind of meant to just be looked at like that.
Are they safe enough to pass around or no?
Yeah, you can pass it around if you want to look at it. Do you want to pass it around? Just be careful and obviously don't get it wet. I don't know how you probably can't have any liquids, but that's always my fear. I actually had a nightmare where I was like sleeping in this rainy house. It was when I was living in Seattle, and it was raining constantly, of course, and the roof, I was sleeping in this shanty, and the roof was leaking, and then I was like, oh my God, my books. And I went over, and like all of my book art was like wet. And then I was like, and then in the morning I was like, oh my God, my book art is ruined. And then I realized it was just a dream, but But yeah, so, this book will be sealed up, but it's just interesting to be able to show, Yeah, that one's sealed up. And so they're more stable when they're sealed, but it can be interesting to be able to flip a little bit to just see, how everything's bound and what more is on the page other than what you can see, and how, I'm just basically cutting the same pattern over and over, and sort of like the area that gets cut away is shrinking, but everything is held together by, everything's, in the end, it's still connected to the spine.
You ever excavated words?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that in here. This one says, driftwood, to breathe the musk of life, love, friendship, home, that haunt the dreams of us who drift and roam. And those lines are just on a couple different pages that connected. One of the pieces in this show that's up at next month, that Rousseau-Lee has a longer word poem in it. It's a book about flowers, and it's in that series of the Golden Nature pocket guides, like the one that's being passed around. And the bottom of the book it didn't have any illustrations in it, so I was kind of if I wanted to use the book, I was forced to fill it in with words, more or less. So I just took the descriptions of the flowers and kind of made a sort of sensible nonsense poetry, I guess, out of the words, different lines from different pages. So it's kind of cascading different fragments of phrases, and I enjoy that, but it's I guess it's just as tedious as anything else of it. But
Do you ever get tempted to take a fresh piece of paper and put it in? Or do you not need to do that?
I've done some. I have some just little sketchbook stuff that I'm collaging stuff into that I will just cut through. But no, I enjoy the idea of it being sort of collaboration with the creator of the book, sort of in a way, an unintended collaboration, where it's it's about the book, and it's, it doesn't need anything else. If it's not there, I don't want to add anything to it. Yeah.
If I was understanding you, you're deliberately choosing books where there are others of that book, so that the inherentness of a particular book isn't yours. But if it were a fantasy, is there a particular, book that you'd love to do something with, that maybe because it's rare or something you wouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, they tend to prohibit themselves by their own price. I did see this book that was I think it was maybe in a series of 100 or 200 or something, but it was a Masonic tome that was a Freemasons, just a guide to the rituals and stuff, and it had amazing illustrations, and I can't remember how much it was several $1,000s, I don't know. But then it's sort of in that case, I would sort of want to just find a way to make a reproduction of that, to be able to make a reproduction of it, because it would probably cost, I don't know if you could get it to be cost effective to have. I know that there is a company that does reproductions of old like European manuscripts and stuff, but I haven't really looked into it. Or it would be fun to be able to like alter illuminated manuscripts that aren't really the thing, but to be able to use that material, which is the fun thing about one of the books that I recently did is Taschen does a lot of that kind of thing where they're taking images. So this book that I altered is a book of botanical prints from the National Museum or the National Library in Vienna. And so it's just a bunch of flowers and stuff, but the prints are actually, date back to like 1300s, and so, through the Renaissance. And so I am able to use that material, but it's, the book was published, 10 years ago. So it still has that nostalgic feel, and you still can appreciate the old prints. And they do a really good job of reprinting and doing quality work where it's worth looking at, but yeah, it would be fun. It would definitely be fun. They had some manuscripts in a show here, some illuminated manuscripts. I think it was Venice. It was a show about Venice and music, and they had some illuminated manuscripts that were really super amazing. But yeah.
Do you ever do children's books?
I haven't really done any children's books, but I guess the Golden Nature guides are were maybe targeted towards children some, but maybe just because adults aren't curious anymore, or I don't know. I really like. A lot of the subject matter that I like is sort of academic in a way, where it's like I like to have, things that relate to different fields of study and learn some from it too. And I like really refined illustrations more, I guess. And children's books tend to be like a little too sloppy, and I'm just like, I can't work with it. But maybe.
But the reproductions of a lot of the old, 19th century illustrators.
Some of the fairy tale ones and stuff. I have thought about some of those. I just haven't done them yet. But
Some of those really old ones have astonishing illustrations.
true. Yeah.
Have you ever done a project where you altered the overall message of the book? I'm thinking about, I was reminded of looking what you've done there. A friend of mine I used to know, in his apartment, he had this huge book, the subject of which was rather, whoever wrote it, I don't remember who wrote it, but it was sort of angry and vile in a particular direction.
Uh-huh.
And what he did was he would take a full spread for each page, and the pages were pretty big, and he would cross out or he'd black out all the words except for maybe a very short sentence.
Uh-huh.
It was a positive, glowing, beautiful.
Oh, nice.
And you completely changed the meaning of the book.
Uh-huh.
Like, have you ever done something like that where like it's the book's about this, and now after you've done it, the book's about this?
Well, I guess they tend to be about what they're about, but then sort of, this book here is Jehovah's Witness Watchtower publication of, does evolution really exist? And I was making it for a friend of mine who's does believe that evolution exists, and he wanted me to keep a sense of humor about it, and because he produced a play that was sort of what is the word? I mean, I guess it was sort of making light of religion, and so he wanted something that would go along with that in that vein. So sort of, I kind of usurped their idea and switched it around a little bit. The words in this say, mutations in millions of air sacs assert new sexual acceptance without ape-like fossils of the past. So, I don't know. I don't think that the Jehovah's Witnesses would agree with that statement, but I don't know if anyone agrees with that statement. But it does have a lot of nice illustrations in it, and it's not, it's not anti-religion or anything. I just was having fun with it,
So did you have to take the words right from the book and make it that way, or did you make
Yeah.
the words out of your own mind?
No, they're just like on the pages in there, so they just kind of. It makes it's much more unpredictable with the words because you never know how they're going to line up. Whereas like with the pictures, you can kind of just really easily look and see oh, is that going to end up there? Is there anything in that spot? But the words are so small, it's hard to, and you have to kind of just cut through and just go with it as it goes. Yeah.
How many projects do you have? So, for example, right now, how many book excavations do you have in your studio which are started and not finished?
I have 3 or 4 pieces that are. I usually try to start one and finish it, but I have 3 or 4 pieces that are kind of maybe just on pause, I guess. Yeah. I mean, some of these are actually just waiting to be framed. Like this one I have frames built for all of these ones. I just have to put them in the frames. I just haven't gotten to it. So, but luckily, because otherwise I wouldn't have anything to bring. Because they usually, once I'll frame them, then they'll go off to the gallery or shows or whatever. So.
But then they never get opened again, or the person?
Yeah, it's pretty much, once because they're painted shut, and then framed, and then, whatever they do with it, I guess that's what they're going to do with it. I would assume that they would just leave it in the frame. But some of them I have done with stands, something like this might have more of a stand where it would just get a case, and just be on a bookshelf or something. And so they can be displayed in different ways. But thanks everybody for coming. Thank you.